All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, I really quickly want to first thank our moderator, Lucy Nandy, as well as our speakers, Amy, Jawaria, and Jing, for giving talks today. We're really grateful for your time. And then I'd also like to give a brief introduction of who we are. So we're the AGU Atmospheric Science Early Career Committee. And this is the seminar series subcommittee. So that consists of me, Ren, Payush, and Ben. And so generally, the AGU Early Career Committee provides resources for and creates and promotes professional activities for early career scientists. We do have some upcoming webinars that we'd like to bring your attention to. So we have a Careers in Atmospheric Science Private Sector happening on Monday, July 10th at 2 p.m. And then the seminar series committee is also planning on hosting 2 more seminars in 2023 before the fall 2023 AGU meeting. And as always, if any of you ever have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us by our email, and you can also check out our website. And then one note is that the current meeting is going to be recorded, and this will be uploaded to the AGU YouTube channel as well as our website. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to, I'm going to give a brief bio of our moderator, Lucy. So Lucy Nandy is an aerosol scientist and recently joined the US Food and Drug Administration to analyze aerosol spray products for inhalation. Prior to this, she was a postdoctoral scholar at Pennsylvania State University, studying heterogeneous ice nucleation activity in engineered particles relevant to the atmosphere. She has also worked in the Atmospheric Sciences Department at University of Illinois as a visiting scholar after her PhD from University of Minnesota, studying atmospheric aerosols by thermodynamic modeling and microfluidic measurements. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Lucy to introduce our first speaker.
All right, thank you very much. I'm excited to moderate the seminar and look forward to the 3 speakers. For the speakers, you have 12 minutes for your talk and then 2 to 3 minutes for questions. I'll give you a heads up when you're 10 minutes into the talk. And after the 3 talks, we'll have the last 10 to 15 minutes for further questions for all the 3 speakers. So I encourage the audience to keep submitting questions throughout the session. All right, let's start with our first speaker, Dr. Amy Christensen. Dr. Christensen is an atmospheric chemist whose expertise lies in global chemical transport modeling and data analysis of national and international air quality monitoring information. She holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of California, Irvine, and recently completed her postdoc at the University of Montana. Last fall, she joined the School of Science and Engineering at the University of Missouri, Kansas City as an assistant professor of chemistry. Dr. Christensen's research interests focused on numerical modeling and data analysis, specifically employing long-term atmospheric measurements to understand spatial and temporal trends of pollutants and improve global model simulations. She recently participated in the Atmospheric Chemistry Colloquium for emerging senior scientists and received the Most Promising Future Faculty Award from the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Christensen, please take it away.
All right, thank you for that introduction. I think I need to be made presenter.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay.
Okay, can everyone see that?
You're good.
Okay. All right, so thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk about some preliminary work that's being done in my lab in the past couple of months, looking at exploring the environmental justice air quality landscape here in Kansas City, Missouri. So the environmental justice literature is pretty clear that communities of color are typically exposed to higher levels of air pollution than predominantly white populations. And so this is illustrated really well in this panel on the left. Let me just get my pointer here, this graph here. So this is looking specifically at nitrogen dioxide or NO2 concentrations and exposure across the most white census tracts and least white census tracts amongst a variety of large metropolitan areas. And so typically what we see is that the least white census tracts are exposed to higher pollution levels than the most white census tracts. And this is something that is persistent across time and also through periods of drastic emissions reductions, for example, during the COVID-19 lockdown period. So if we look at Los Angeles as an example, this solid line represents a baseline, and the dashed line represents the COVID-19 lockdown period. So we can see that even though those NO2 concentrations decreased, that discrepancy between the most white and least white census tracts still persists. And this is something that has occurred over time as well. So this is illustrated nicely in this graph here, which is taken from a Colmar paper. So here it's looking at PM 2.5 percentile ranks in 1981 and 2016 for various census tracts. So essentially, if you have you're the 100th percentile for PM 2.5 in 1981, so you have the worst air pollution, and you look at where that is in 2016, you notice it's very much on the same sort of worst percentile. So that what that means is that the areas that have the worst pollution in 1981 still have the worst pollution in 2016, even though the overall concentration of PM 2.5 has been decreasing over time. And so one thing to note when we're looking at a lot of these analyses that have been done previously is that they focus on really large population centers, places like Los Angeles or Houston or New York. And these places tend to be located more close to the coast. But in the Midwest, we haven't received as much of that attention, especially from an environmental justice standpoint. So as a resident of someone who lives really smack dab in the middle of the country here in Kansas City, I wanted to kind of take that analysis a little bit closer to home. So when you think about air quality in places that have really bad air quality, you're probably not thinking of Kansas City, right? When you think of Kansas City, you might think about the most recent Super Bowl or the number of fountains we have in the city or a really delicious barbecue. But typically you're not going to think, okay, this is a place where we really need to be concerned about air quality. And I want to kind of reject that notion. Even though we live in an area that maybe doesn't have as bad air quality as somewhere like Los Angeles, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues that we need to pay attention to. So I just also want to point out that when I refer to Kansas City today, I'm going to actually be referring to the entire metropolitan area. So that's the 6 counties that make up sort of the entire Kansas City area. So it includes a couple counties in Kansas and 4 counties in Missouri. So Kansas City actually is really no stranger to poor air quality. So most recently, we were having issues with sulfur dioxide. We were in non-attainment for SO2 from 2013 to 2021, mostly because of a power plant, which was coal burning at the time. And so we were able to get our SO2 emissions back into regulatory values by switching to burning natural gas rather than coal. But I do want to point out that air quality issues in the region, we're no stranger to them, and some of those issues are in very recent memory. So even though we're in an area where that is, it's kind of seen as having better air quality, that doesn't mean we don't have issues to pay attention to. And the other reason that Kansas City is really interesting to look at is because of this long history of discriminatory housing practices that the area has had, which you'll find in pretty much every city in the United States, that has really led to some interesting demographic trends in the city. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on that that metropolitan area. So these are the 6 counties that make up the metropolitan area. And then I'm zooming in again more closely on Jackson County, which is where most of the population in Kansas City lives. So this underlying shapes here, these are all census tracts. And these census tracts are colored by percent of the population that identified as Black or African American on the census. So a darker blue color indicates a higher percentage of that population identifying as Black. And what you'll notice in this county is that there's this really stark dividing line between where we have sort of our predominantly Black communities and the areas which are more predominantly white. And that line is illustrated here. This is Troost Avenue. So that was kind of the de facto dividing line for a lot of the redlining activities that occurred in the city. And it's really interesting to see that even though those practices have been illegal for decades, we still see this really stark divide in our population demographics, even after all that time. And so this makes it really interesting to explore potential air quality discrepancies because we have such a clear dividing line in our population demographics, but yet no one's really been exploring this in depth. So that was one of the things that we really wanted to look at starting off in this lab. First, we wanted to establish the extent to which these air quality discrepancies exist in the metropolitan area, quantify the size of those pollution disparities on both an annual and seasonal basis. And then at the end, if I have time, I do want to talk a little bit about a participatory science network that we're working to establish. All right, so the first way that we looked at this was to look at ground monitoring information from 2 regulatory ground monitors in the metro area. So again, this is the zoom in of the Jackson County area. Where the monitors are located are represented by the stars. So these 2 monitors have a time frame in common from 2003 to 2016. Unfortunately, one of the monitors stopped operating in 2016, so we can really only do this analysis for a limited period of time. But this is sort of our first way of looking at differences in air pollution on the west side of Troost Avenue and the east side. All right, so what I'm showing you here are distributions, both box plot distributions and density plot distributions of the PM2.5 concentrations that have been measured at these 2 locations. So we have our monitor west of Troost, which is more of our predominantly white population, and then our monitor east of Troost, which is our more predominantly Black populations. And so what we see is that the PM2.5 concentrations to the east of Troost are higher than those west of Troost. So consistent with what we see in other metropolitan areas, we're seeing that our predominantly Black communities are experiencing a higher level of PM2.5 burden. On average, this is greater than 1 microgram per cubic meter, which is about 10% higher than our predominantly white populations. And this is something that persists as well throughout the year. So we did a seasonal analysis as well, which is summarized in this table. What you're looking at here are differences between those monitors. So our east monitor minus our west monitor. And so what we see here is that they're all positive numbers, which indicates that our east monitor is experiencing a higher PM2.5 burden than our west monitor. So again, this is just showing that our predominantly Black communities are facing higher PM2.5 burden, and this is occurring throughout the year. And the vast majority of these are also statistically significant differences. All right. So that was a really nice way to kind of take a first stab at it, but you can see that these monitors, they don't cover a very large area when we consider the entire metropolitan region. And so we wanted to investigate this by looking at all of the counties that we could look at and all the census tracts we could look at. So we took demographic information from the United States Census Bureau, and we also took PM2.5 predictions from EPA's downscaler model. So that just takes regulatory information in combination with CMAQ model output, and then it maps to PM2.5 concentrations at the census tract level. And so we investigated these trends from 2010 to 2019. All right, so our findings are kind of summarized on this slide here. So we broke it down in a little bit by looking at the census tracts and the percentage of people that identify as Black within each census tract, and then plotting the distribution of PM2.5 from there. So this less than 30% indicates that these are the census tracts where less than 30% of the population is identifying as Black or African American on the census. Then we have 30 to 60% of the population identifying as Black, and finally greater than 60%. So as we look at the PM2.5 concentrations, as we move towards our more predominantly Black census tracts, we see that that PM2.5 concentration does increase. And the other thing to note is that these lower values for PM2.5 are also increasing. So we see a consistently higher PM2.5
Amy, are you there? Amy, we can't hear you.
Amy, can you hear us? I'm going to try to call Josh, the organizer. Josh is coming back. Josh, are you there?
Yes, what can I help you with?
The speaker lost the ability to speak into the mic.
I'm gonna go ahead and mute and unmute. Amy, can you try signing off and back in? It might be an issue on your end. I'm not 100% sure. Still no volume.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Amy. We did notice a internet kind of cut out for Amy for maybe 30 seconds or so before this happened.
Amy, can you hear us? Can you shake your head?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you're back on.
What was that?
We can hear you now.
Oh, you can. Okay, great. I apologize. I don't know what happened. Okay, but you can all see my screen again?
Yep, you're good to go.
All right, I apologize for those technical difficulties. I'll just summarize this slide again. So basically the PM2.5 differences that we see are persistent over time as well. So we're continuing, even though our PM2.5 concentrations have decreased over time, we are seeing that discrepancy is persisting. All right, so I'll try to make this very brief since I apologize for taking up some extra time there, but I did want to mention that we are trying to make this not just a purely academic exercise. So rather than me sitting in my office and saying, wow, those discrepancies exist and that's really bad, we want to actually do something with that information. And so we're working in collaboration with EPA Region 7, which is based here in Kansas City. So we're conducting currently a pilot study to assess the usefulness of some low-cost purple air PM2.5 sensors for environmental justice applications. So we have several sensors set up around the UMKC campus, as well as co-located with some regulatory monitors to see what we can what kind of information we can get from these sensors in terms of both relative changes in concentration and absolute changes in concentration. And then our next step is to work with partners in the neighborhood. So UMKC has some programs that put researchers in contact with local community members to loan out these sensors and get people thinking about air quality in their neighborhood and thinking of ways that we can actually start to resolve the discrepancies that we see. So just to conclude briefly, consistent with other major metropolitan areas, we do see that PM2.5 concentrations are significantly higher in our predominantly Black neighborhoods and that this persists over time. So in the future, we do want to use participatory science to kind of increase awareness around air quality and environmental justice issues and also help to empower some local community action. So we also want to extend our analysis to look at other pollutants, other demographics, maybe look at sector contributions and also expand to other Midwestern cities and areas that typically get less attention in this type of activity. All right, so I'll just leave my acknowledgements up, specifically my group members as well as EPA Region 7 for all the help that they have been giving with this project. If you want to learn more about what my lab does, you can visit my website, and of course you can always contact me by email. So I'm looking forward to our panel discussion later. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was a nice talk. So we don't have any questions, so probably we will get some questions later during our discussion. So I moved to Missouri last month, or to St. Louis area. So this data is very interesting that you just showed, and because I find this similar setup here as well. So yeah, nice work. All right, so let's move on to our second speaker, Dr. Jawaria Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed works at the Center for Water Informatics and Technology in Lahore University of Management Sciences, Pakistan. She did her PhD from the University of Maryland, where she was a Fulbright foreign student. The work she will present today is part of her Climate and Cryosphere Fellowship. Due to the rapidly changing climate, it is critical to monitor the cryosphere in the third pole. In her presentation today, Dr. Ahmed will talk about some recent efforts to understand catchment scale cryospheric changes within the third pole. Dr. Ahmed, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So can you see my screen fine?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to share my study here. I'll talk about snow mass estimation in the Upper Indus Basin. So a little different from Amy's presentation, but perhaps connected in some ways. So what we're doing here is we want to study seasonal snow in the Upper Indus Basin. And what is the Upper Indus Basin? So the Upper Indus Basin lies in different parts of Pakistan, India, China, and Afghanistan. Why is it important? It is very important because not just because of the number of people who live here, but because of the number of people who depend on the snow for their fresh water. So the image that you see here, before I go any further, is actually from one of our the first field campaign in Pakistan to collect snow profile data. So the study is in collaboration with the Institute of Snow and Avalanche Research, SLF, in Davos, Switzerland. Now, why is snow important? So as I just mentioned as well, snow is very important in this area because most of the fresh water comes from snow and ice melt. And Pakistan, particularly countries in high mountain Asia, depend on the snow melt for water resource management. And we don't know a lot about the snow depth here, particularly at these high resolutions, meaning at catchment scales. And that hampers our ability to know about how much fresh water will there be this year or in the coming years. So the goal of this project was to improve seasonal snow mass estimation across high mountain Asia, but in particular, I was looking at 3 catchments in Pakistan through modeling and in-situ data collection. Now, the idea was first to go collect some measurements in the field. Now, this was actually a very big achievement of this project because nothing like this had been done in Pakistan up until now. So we organized a field campaign, a small team, a very small team, and we went to 2 sites. So one was in Swat Valley and one was Kardu. And these 2 sites were selected because they had different climates. So both had like snowfall, high snowfall. However, Swat is a high vegetation area, so it's much greener. But in Skardu, it's drier, and the elevations are much higher, and there's more complex topography. So the second part was collecting the data from snowpack characterizing data. So what is snowpack characterizing data? Meaning variables that can be used to characterize the snowpack. So such as snow depth, density, grain size, air and snow temperature. And then analyzing our data, and then the important set of modeling. So the modeling comes into place here because when we go to these sites, we can just measure data from at point scales at a few locations. However, we want spatial and temporal data for a long time so we can see if there are any trends or not. And that is where the models come in. So I use the snowpack and Alpine 3D models, and they've been developed at the SLF. So we used these two models to model snowpack accumulation and then ablation for 40 years to see the trends in snow depth into this area, and then evaluated the model results with the measurements that we had collected. Apart from these measurements, we also used data from different sensors that had been placed, and then disseminating the data that we have collected, because this is very valuable data, since this helps in evaluating the different modeled estimates of snow or air temperature that we have at very high resolution. So going towards in-situ measurements a little bit more. So apart from our own measurements, a couple of sensors have also been installed, and these sensors measure snow depth, rainfall, air temperature, humidity, and runoff. These are telemetry-based sensors. And the catchment that you see in this figure here is the Gabin Jabba catchment in Swat Valley, Pakistan. And this is a small catchment, self-contained, and it is a good catchment to study for our purposes, because there's not a lot of external interference from neighboring catchments. Now, the station that you see here in the red color called the middle sensor. So I'll show the results for this sensor, because the measurements from the sensor are more stable, because it is located in a relatively flat area in this very very complex terrain. And the reason behind installing this sensor was so that alerts of flash floods could be generated. So there's a stream flow sensor as well. So if there were changes in the water level, instantaneous changes in the water level, so the community that lives downstream could be told about those changes in water levels. Now, the other part was when we went to measure. So we collected measurements from two sites. So one was a forest covered site, and the other was an area which was not forest covered. And this gave us an idea to see how the model was performing when there was interference from the trees around an area, or when it was just plain with no forest cover. So we collected some measurements. These are standard snow pit measurements. And the picture that you see here on the right is actually from one of the snow pits that we made. And you can see different snow layers are representative of different snowstorms throughout the season. Then about the second side. Now this is Skardu. So this is actually not the site, but the road that led to the site. We couldn't go there because there was landsliding. This is an area where the infrastructure is still being developed, and therefore the access to these locations is the major concern. How do we get there? So there's only one road that goes up to the catchment that we wanted to study, and because there was landsliding, we couldn't go to that particular area. However, we did collect measurements from other nearby sites in Skardu, Gilgit-Baltistan. But one major lesson from this particular expedition was that it is very important when planning field campaigns of any size in these remote areas, that you have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, because anything can go wrong at the last minute. Now going towards the modeling. So snowpack is used for point scale modeling. Point scale meaning at one particular location. So this is 1D. And snowpack describes the snow microstructure, snowpack layering, snowpack interaction with the atmosphere. So the first part was to downscale forcing. So we were using the ERA 5 meteorological forcings, which perhaps most of you are familiar with. And the first part is to downscale them. So we use this TopoScale tool, which has been developed by Fidesz et al. So Dr. Fidesz is also a co-author on this study. And the coarse ERA 5 forcings were first downscaled using elevation and then pressure gradient data. So radiation, temperature, and relative humidity was downscaled. The precipitation, however, was not downscaled, and this is an important part that I'll come back to. This is just a representation of the methodology. Now some results. So this is for the middle sensor that I showed you in Gabrine Chapa-Swab. The first row is snow depth, and the blue is the snowpack modeled snow depth, and the red is what the sensor measured. So sensor was measuring snow depth at 10 minutes intervals, but here I've averaged it for daily values. Now these are for 40 years, but the sensor started collecting measurements in 2019. So the sensor measurements are limited. However, in this area, we were happy to have any measurements. Therefore, those 4 years of measurements in this area are very valuable for us. So you'll see that, but in terms of snow depth, we do see some error in terms of root mean square error. However, the correlation is quite well, which means that the start of the accumulation of the snowpack and then the ablation of the snowpack, and when it reaches the peak snow, so those are consistent, where the modeled snow is consistent with the measured snow. In terms of air temperature, so this is an important thing to remember. The air temperature correlation is very high, and the error is also very low. And but it's important here because this gives us a sense of reliability in our modeled estimates. As you see, in Chitral and Skardu, this was not the case. There was a lot of bias in the air temperature, which is why there was bias in the modeled snow depth as well. However, for Swab, we're seeing that in terms of air temperature, ERA 5 is doing a good job, and downscaled air temperature is close to what the sensor on the ground is measuring. Now, the second time series that you see here is just the singular spectrum analysis. So we decompose the time series into different additive trends. So the long-term seasonal trends, which you see in the green, and then different seasonal, so the first, second, third seasonal trends, and then we have some residuals. We do see a decreasing long-term trend. So the green line that you see here, it is decreasing over the 40 years. However, this trend was linear, it was statistically insignificant. But again, we do have to realize that there is a linear decreasing trend in this case. And this is just one location where we had these observations. And another important thing to see here is that the primary seasonal trend, so the purple line or magenta line that you see here, now the amplitude of that trend is decreasing, meaning that the variation, internal variation of the seasonal trend is decreasing, and that is of concern. So moving towards Chitral. So I did not mention Chitral because we did not collect measurements in Chitral ourselves, but we found this organization called the Afghan Agency for Habitat, and they have been collecting these measurements from 2016 up until now, so more than 5 years of data. And this is a very, very useful resource here. In these remote villages, we have snow depth measurements, and then we also have maximum and minimum air temperatures. So this is just one station that I'm showing here. This is in Parsan, high elevation and complex topography in terms of Parsan catchment. And the first time series that you see, again, in red we have the sensor, and the blue we have the snowpack. So here we saw that the root mean square error is lower than SWAT. However, we have to remember that the peak snow depth is lower as well, but the correlation is poorer. So the model is doing a poorer job of modeling snow in Chitral as compared to Swat. And one of the main reasons is that there is a bias in the temperature. So the second time series that you see for maximum minimum temperature, so the red and green line is for the ground sensors, and then the blue and cyan line is for the ERA 5 maximum and minimum. So this is daily maximum and daily minimum temperature. And we saw that particularly in the maximum temperature, there is a cold bias. That is, the ERA 5 temperatures are colder than what the sensor on the ground is measuring. However, in terms of the minimum temperature, the correlation is quite high and root mean square error is also low. So therefore, we see that in terms of the minimum temperature, the ERA 5 is doing a good job. However, in terms of maximum temperature, there are biases. And because of that, there's not enough snow melt. So in the first time series that you see, you'll see that the blue line, it starts decreasing much later than the red line. So it means that the modeled snowpack is melting at a later date as compared to the snowpack on the ground, the actual snowpack on the ground. Now, in terms of all the ground stations that we had, so we had 31 ground stations, and the root mean square error ranged from 12.1 to 49 for snow depth. And again, for maximum air temperature, the root mean square error is higher and lower for minimum air temperature. And one thing that we noticed was that the bias was higher for areas that were in lower elevation, and that this is because the precipitation and temperature, the meteorological forcings that we are using, they're more representative of high elevation locations, meaning colder areas with more snowfall. Now, in terms of Skardu, so the Skardu was one of our main sites as well. So the station that I'm showing here is the Chunda Valley station. This is comparable to the elevation that you saw in Swat. So here there's only an air temperature sensor. There is a snow depth measurement sensor as well, but that's not very reliable. So I'm just using the air temperature to see. And again, we see that the blue line is lower than the red line, meaning that the ERA 5 temperature is biased. It is colder than the ground measurements. And this sensor was giving us measurements every 10 minutes. So it's pretty reliable. In terms of the measurements that we collected when we went there at 5 locations, we see very high error in terms of snow depth. So the model is predicting or estimating that there's a lot of snow, even though when we went there, we saw that there was not that much snow there. And one of the reasons could be that some of the locations that we visited were like the down or there's a lot of snow in the mountain top, but we visited the bottom area. And that is why the snowpack at like the base of the mountain is much lower as compared to the mountain tops. And the modeled snow is more representative of the snowpack at the top of the mountain as compared to the base of the mountain. And similarly, we see error in the air temperature as well. These temperature recordings were taken ourselves, therefore we have these are reliable measurements. So the ERA 5 air temperature also, again, similar to Chitral, is colder than what we measured on the ground.
Dr. Could you wrap up?
Wrapping up, and so these were just point scale measurements. However, we also did then use Alpine 3D to do 3-dimensional modeling. And I won't go into the methodology, but just show a couple of results here. So this is just for the Gambhir Jabba catchment in Swat. And I'll play the video as I talk in the interest of time. This is the catchment that we see in gray. And it starts snowing in October. Then we see a lot of snow happens in November. Now, we saw by comparing the measurements that we made that we took measurements at 2 areas. So the area which was surrounded by trees, the bias is higher. So, but here the interesting part is that we measured almost 143 centimeters of snow, but the model is actually underestimating the snow. Now in Chitral and Skardu, we saw that the model was overestimating the snow. However, for Swat, the model is actually underestimating the snow. And similarly, a little bit different for the flat area, there the bias was lower. So just to move towards the conclusions. The conclusions were that we saw a decreasing trend in SWOT. However, it was not statistically significant, but it is still there. And from what we heard from the locals, the snow is, it seems that the snow is decreasing. It is melting rapidly, and the magnitudes are also perhaps decreasing. There were biases in temperature and precipitation forcings in Chitral and Skardu, and that they were transferred then to the model snow depth as well. So the idea is that we need representative precipitation. In Chitral and Skardu, we need a downscaling technique so that at low elevation areas, the model forcing would be representative of the actual precipitation that happens in those low elevation areas. And one main thing is that to be able to do these downscalings, we need ground data and we need more MET stations, which is perhaps the conclusion of this study. So I'll stop here and just acknowledge that this study was funded by the Climate and Cryosphere Fellowship that I got from World Climate Research Program. This was a collaborative study with the Institute of Snow and Avalanche Research in Davos. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Audience, okay, I don't see any questions still. Audience, I encourage you to submit questions. So Dr. Ahmed, I had a little like curiosity. So you had like similar altitudes, right, for two of the stations. So what differences did you see with the two sites?
Yeah, so I think that this was perhaps not by like prior thinking, but we were lucky that we got these two locations which were at similar elevation. However, their climatology is very different. So in Swat, it is a greener area. There is more humidity. The elevations are similar, however, the climate is different. In Skardu, it is more complex topography, so meaning higher slopes, and it is drier as well, because by the time the air reaches Skardu, so there are multiple mountain ranges, by the time it reaches Skardu, the moisture had been taken out from the air and it is drier. And therefore, the total snowfall is actually less as compared to what is happening in Swat. And so we know this beforehand. In terms of the model results, we see that the snowpack is actually being underestimated in Swat. However, it is being overestimated in Skardu.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you so much. That was a nice talk.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the third speaker, Dr. Jing Wei. Dr. Wei is a research associate in Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center at the University of Maryland, College Park. He specialized in air quality, aerosols, particulate matter, trace gases and clouds by means of remote sensing, artificial intelligence, and big data, and accessing the impacts of air pollution on environmental health. He has authored over 70 papers in leading journals, 13 of which are highly cited by the Web of Science. He was the recipient of the AGU James R. Holton Award and on the Stanford University list of the world's top 2% scientists in 2020 and 2021. He has served as an editor of Earth System Science Data and associate editor of Journal of Geophysical Research, Atmospheres and Remote Sensing. Great, Dr. Wei, we're ready for your talk.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. I was really glad to be here to give a talk. Yeah, I will share my screen first. Okay, okay. Okay. So hello everyone, today I will give a talk on tracking ambient particulate and gaseous pollution from space using advanced AI models. I'm Jin Wei. Yeah, I'm from University of Maryland. Ambient air pollution now we know it has become urgent environmental health threat and ranked fourth. Respirator reported by the WHO. Yes, now it particularly in developing countries like China. Today I will give an example in China which is polluted one. Yeah. Okay, the air pollution mainly contains particulate and gaseous pollutants, yeah, such as the PM2.5, PM1, PM10, and the gaseous like the ozone, yes, NO2, SO2, and CO. However, their sources are very complex, such as the figure in the middle panel. You will not see that the different emissions from to the pollutant, making estimate the surface pollutants are more challenging. Here, the good news that the era of big data-driven AI has arrived. Nowadays, we have developed several state-of-the-art AI tools by extending them by considering their special information of pollution to address different regulation problems, such like from the daily scale to the hourly scale, and then to address the overfitting issues to help improve the accuracy and efficiencies of our model and estimates. Below three phase shows the models we developed in private studies, such as the space-time lattice BM model, space-time lattice trees model, and the four-dimensional spatial temporal deep forest. They are different machine and deep learning models. Used here include different sources of data, such as satellite remote sensing. It includes both the LEO and the GEO satellites like MODIS, VIRS, and MARINIT. Also, other satellite retrievals like the surface, ADVI, and the population. Also, the ground measurements we collect from different global and national networks such like the OpenAQ and the US EPE and the Chinese CNEMC, as well as local sensors. Also, we include the atmospheric analysis like the EIE5 and the MER2. Also, the model simulations like the GEOS, CF, and the FMP simulations and MAC or CAMS emission inventory will include the model. The first question is, we all know that the air pollution levels in China has impressed the environment change over the last 2 decades, but the country-wide ground measurements only back to 2013. The first question is, how did PM2.5 change during the last 2 decades? Also, its composition. Thanks more than 20 years of the long-term observations from the project MODIS, yes, it provides higher resolution AOD products. This enables to retrieval 1 kilometer PM data records since 2000 in China. This can make up for the gap in studies on the PM variations across China. Yes, using the MODIS MOAC AOD products, we first reconstructed 1 kilometer PM during the last 2 decades. Yes, you can see the left figure shows the circle maps of annual mean PM during the last 2 decades, and the central ones show that multi-year mean. You can see that the PM has changed a lot across China. And the right figure shows the tenfold cross-validation model. We can see it daily PM retrievals well and among different years. Then we use the data set to explore the long-term temporal variations. The left figure shows the annual PM trend during the decades. You can see that the PM has significantly decreased in most areas, especially in the North China Plain. This is mainly thanks a lot of the government actions combating the air pollution in China. Considering during such a long period that the increasing and decreasing trends could be offset during such a long period, then we calculate more severe anomalies of PM 2.5 in China and the region. We found a very interesting contribution, you can see that both the national and the regional PM showed increasing trends until 2007, and then they remained a very high level until 2013, and which then they decreased sharply. This is benefit from the reductions of the human emissions, especially for the organic aerosols. Okay, next study we focus on 17 PM chemical composition while deep learning. Yes, SIA components like sulfate, nitrate, and ammonium is the main cause of severe gas pollution. Use deep learning, we separate the PM chemical composition from satellite PM 2.5 total mass using a high density observation network. This figure shows the validation results at each monitoring station as well as the national. You can see that our results are all reliable compared with environments. This figure shows the multi-year annual mean PM composition across Eastern China. Yes, our study provides detailed clear maps which can offer valuable insights to the composition of chemical composition and its ratio to PM.5 mass in China. We found that the fall in organic aerosol account for 58% of PM in Eastern China. And the 3 SIA components account for about 21 and 20 and 14% of the total PM mass. We can also find that the PM components are very differently among regions, such like you can see that the sulfate dominant in the South China area, while the nitrate dominant in the Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei region. Yes, this is located in North China. This figure shows the temporal variation and the trends of chemical composition. We found a very contrasting spectral pattern. Yes, the left panel shows the trends for PM components. We can see they are similar with PM. They show a significant decrease in trends across the Eastern China. But for the ratio, we found that the ratio show an opposite increasing trends across Eastern China. This is mainly due to the faster decline in other components such as the the organic aerosols as well as dust. The right figure shows the annual variations of different components. We found that yes, the sulfate has been the dominant SIA components in Eastern China, while we found that the difference between the sulfate and nitrate are getting more smaller. This indicates that the sulfate gradually approach to it. However, the difference exists in regional. Yeah, you can find that sulfate remains dominant in the PRD region. Yes, it's in South China, but the sulfate dominates in YD region. But in the BTH, yes, Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, we found a very interesting conclusion. Yes, you can see the sulfate the contribution of sulfate was surpassed by the nitrate since 2016, and their difference became larger over the years. Gaseous pollutants at the ground level also pose threat on the urban air quality, especially for the public health. But there are few estimates of gaseous pollutants, and especially temporary continuous. This is limited because there are weaker signals as well as a lack of good quality satellite composite products. Then the next question is, how did long-term surface gaseous pollutants such as the ozone, NO2, SO2, and CO change across China? Yes, we extended our machine learning models by interpreting monitors, satellites, and models to map 4 daily pollutants and a uniform 10 kilometers since 2013 in China. This figure shows the long-term summer mean ozone variations. You can find in this study, we offer a new perspective to estimate surface ozone using the solar radiation intensity and temperature. You know, because most of the satellite retrievals are the total column of the ozone observations, but the tropospheric ozone only counts for less than 10%. Especially this making it particularly difficult for separating the surface ozone. Yeah. From this picture, we can find that the ozone pollution has significantly increased and reached a peak about 2019, and then it has declined a little in 2020. This is mainly due to the both controlled of PM and ozone, especially for the effects of the COVID-19. Then we use this that we can explore the short-term exposure risk and change in ozone pollution. Yes, using this we calculate the daily ozone exposure risk with, I believe, accurate than 160. You can see both the area covered by the ozone pollution, also the probability of occurrence has significantly increased, especially in the North China Plain. You know, this plain also the PM significantly decreased. Yes, they have a strong correlations here. Also, we calculate the surface ozone change before, during, and after COVID-19. We found during the lockdown, there is a contrasting pattern between the North China and the South China, where the North China has significantly increased, but the South decreased. Yes, this is mainly due to different NOx control regimes, because in North China is under a NOx saturated regime, but in the South China, yes, it's under a NOx limited regime, where the NOx reduction would enhance or diminish the ozone formation rates. This is the main reason causing such spectrum pattern. Okay, after outbreak, we found the ozone changed little in most East China areas, indicating that the life had returned to normal.
Dr. Wei, sorry to interrupt you. Could you wrap up? We're out of time.
Okay. Then how about other emission pollutants? We found that this is the trend for different. We can see that the different trends had been accelerated in first several years and then slowed down in recent years. And the right figure shows the change during the COVID-19. We found that the surface CO recovered to its normal level twice faster than SO2 and NO2 due to more CO emissions from increased resistance in dog cooking, as well as the increased atmospheric oxygen capacity. This is the last page shows the population risk according to gaseous pollution. We found that even though the pollution has been significantly decreased, people still suffer from high frequency NO2 risk. But the SO2 and the CO has most reached the recommended WHO critical levels. Okay, this is my talk, and I will briefly introduce the data set we generated. Mentioned above. This is the name of the China high air pollutants. It contains different species of air pollutants and which is publicly available online. Okay, this data set has been used worldwide and published more than 180 papers in leading journals. This is a reference for our study. And we have also generated this focusing on the study and the global PM and generated the global daily PM, and more results will be present in our following studies. Now the paper is on the review in information communications. Okay, this is all for my talk, and thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Wei. So because we don't have much time, so let's move on to the panel discussion. So we'll continue that for about a few minutes. Dr. Ahmed, there was a question for you. do other reanalysis data sets also show a consistent cold bias in temperature?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and the clear answer I would say is not really. We have used ERA 5. However, during my PhD, I have used other forcing data sets as well, such as MERA 2, IMER, CHIRPS. So some of them are models, some of them are mix of model and reanalysis. But I do believe that using different set of forcings perhaps could change the results as far as precipitation is concerned. As far as air temperature is concerned, the data sets that I've used usually are around these ranges. But as far as precipitation is concerned, so I do believe that using different products could influence the model snow depth magnitudes.
All right,
I hope
thank
that
you.
answers the question.
Yeah. Oh, Sarah also has a question for you. Can you expand on some ways you are planning to engage with the community about air quality?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's for me, Amy.
Oh, you both can answer.
I'll let Amy go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I think it's really excellent. So the main way that we're planning to engage with the community, so UMKC has this leadership training program, and it's called the Center for Neighborhoods. And so each year that provides leadership training for members of the community, and each year has a different theme. So the idea that we have is we're going to have one year, the theme is air quality, and this Center for Neighborhoods essentially takes one representative from each of the neighborhoods around sort of the core metropolitan area and provides them with training about, okay, let's learn about what air quality is, how do we use low-cost sensors, right? A lot of these people don't have a scientific background and wouldn't necessarily know if they were just to pick the sensor up off the street, like what do these numbers mean? How can we use the data that we get? Since they're low-cost sensors, sometimes there's concerns about the quality of the data that you can get from them. And so training them in seeing, okay, what can we actually use these sensors for? What does it tell us? And then they can take them into their own communities, maybe at a business that they run or at their home. And then we kind of create this network of sensors around different areas of the city that we can then use to more further explore discrepancies that we see, and then hopefully get people caring about the air quality in their neighborhoods, and then we can come up with ways for how do we actually address these discrepancies. Like if we know that they exist, what are ways that we can come up with together to maybe help start resolve those discrepancies?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We don't have, oh, Dr. Ray, I had a little question. So in one of the regions, I think BTH, there was surpass, the sulfate contribution surpass. So what is the most important region for that specific region for sulfate to surpass nitrate?
Yes, yeah, you can see, yeah, we can find a very different pattern in the BTH. Yes, this is because, yes, you know, in the winter, yes, people need to for heat. Yeah, they could spend a lot of the sulfate into the atmosphere. But in the 2016 and especially for the 2018, yes, they have implemented named ultra low policy to control the sulfate. Yes, this is the main reason for the significant reductions in nitrate. Yeah, but then they didn't have implement many controls on the nitrate for the NOx. Yeah, so this the nitrate has a sensible past. Yeah, the sulfate. I think the main reason.
Great, thank you. So we are almost out of time now. I thank all the speakers for their great talks. Sarah, you want to say?
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you everyone for coming, and Lucy for moderating, and everyone for speaking on such really interesting research. We really appreciate the time you took to present. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thanks for this.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.